Every morning I rise before the sun, 5:30 sharp, without the need for an alarm clock. 72 years of life have trained my body to move with the rhythm of habit, not electricity. I sit at the edge of my bed, letting the silence wrap around me like an old familiar shawl. My bones ache in the usual places, but there's a certain dignity in that pain. It means I'm still here, still standing, still breathing. My home is modest. A one-story brick house tucked at the end of Ashgrove Lane. Neat siding flower beds trimmed with care. It isn't grand, but it's mine. Every corner, every creaky floorboard holds a memory. Some tender, some not. I've lived here alone since Graham passed away nearly 3 decades ago. He was my lighthouse in a stormy sea. When he left, I dropped anchor and stayed put. To the neighbours, I'm Clarisse Whitmore, the quiet widow who trims her hedges every Tuesday, bakes cinnamon scones for the church potlucks, and keeps to herself. They don't know that my silence isn't shyness, it's survival. They think of me as ordinary, predictable, unremarkable, and I let them think it. It's easier that way. After breakfast, always the same oatmeal blueberries, 1 boiled egg and black tea. I get dressed. A charcoal grey wool skirt, a cream blouse, a cardigan hand-stitched with hidden pleats. I designed myself years ago. Nothing flashy, nothing modern, but everything I wear is chosen with care, right down to the brushed silver watch Graham gave me when our son Henry was born. Henry, my only child. I try not to think of him so early in the day. It stirs something in me that doesn't settle easily. But he always finds a way to appear, if not in body, then in thought. Today is one of those days, the first Sunday of the month. Once a month, Henry and his wife Bethany invite, or rather remind me, to come over for a family lunch. It's not a request, it's a formality. Bethany, bless her polished heart, believes in appearances. And nothing says functional family quite like a monthly roast and an awkward smile across a marble dining table. They live in a 2-story glass and marble estate on the north side of town. It was a wedding gift from Bethany's father, Nathaniel Prescott, the kind of man who signs checks with a pen that costs more than most people's rent. Nathaniel helped build Whitmore Prescott Leatherworks into the empire it is today. At least that's what the world believes. But I know better, because once upon a time, that empire started in a 1-room workshop behind this very house. And it wasn't Nathaniel's name on the door, it was mine and Graham's. Of course, no one remembers that now, no one wants to. I step out onto the porch, locking the front door behind me. My Volvo hums to life without protest, just as it has for the last 12 years. A steady companion like myself, reliable, unpretentious, and ignored by most. The drive to Henry's feels longer than it is. Each street lamp, each boutique window we pass is a quiet reminder of a world I once shaped with my hands, and then disappeared from without a trace. When I arrive, Bethany answers the door, not a hair out of place. Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Clarisse," she says, stepping aside as though I might track mud into her imported carpet. "You're right on time." "Hello, Bethany," I reply with a smile that's practiced but not fake. "You look lovely today." She gives me a once-over and replies, "And you look very you." It's meant as a compliment, or maybe not. I no longer try to decipher her code. I step inside, greeted by the scent of rosemary chicken and the distant echo of Henry's voice on a Bluetooth call somewhere upstairs. The house is immaculate but cold, decorated to impress, not to welcome. Everything gleams, but nothing breathes. It's a far cry from the workshop Graham and I built, with our bare hands filled with leather scraps, spilled coffee, and dreams whispered late at night under single bulbs that buzzed like bees. We're seated in the dining room by noon. Henry descends at 12:05, phone still in hand, tie slightly loosened. He kisses my cheek with the detachment of a man checking off a task. "How was the drive, Mom?" he asks, without looking me in the eye. "Smooth," I reply. He nods. "Bethany made roast chicken. You'll love it. I always do." Bethany is a perfectionist, especially when there's an audience. Today that audience includes her parents Nathaniel and Marla, who arrived precisely 12 minutes late just enough to remind us of their importance. The conversation floats around fundraising galas, Bethany's new skincare line, and a potential expansion into European markets. No one asks me what I've been doing, not that I expect them to. At one point, Nathaniel boasts about an upcoming event, the 40th anniversary of the company's founding. It's going to be the event of the year, he says, puffing up like a rooster. Press investors, maybe even the governor. My fork pauses mid-air. 40 years. 40 years since Graham and I inked the very first sketch for our flagship satchel on parchment paper, measuring stitching staining by hand. We didn't have money back then, just talent and an unshakable belief in craftsmanship. You'll be there, of course, Marla says to Bethany. Front row Bethany beams. I helped plan the guest list. No one looks at me, no one mentions my name. That's when I know. They never planned to invite me. And suddenly the roast tastes like ash. The moment I realized I wasn't on the guest list, something inside me went very still. It wasn't rage, not immediately. No rage is loud and blinding. This was something quieter, colder, like walking into a familiar room and finding all the furniture rearranged by strangers. There was a vacancy behind their eyes, a quiet decision made long before this lunch that I no longer belonged. After the meal, I helped clear the plates. Bethany insisted I sit down, but her voice was tight, performative, as if she wanted the offer to be refused. So I complied and sat there listening to her and Marla discuss the flower arrangements for the gala. White orchids and peonies, apparently. Clean, modern, expensive, Marla said. How very timeless, I murmured. No one responded. Henry returned from yet another phone call. He's always on a call and kissed Bethany's temple like an apology. Then suddenly remembering his manners, turned to me. Oh, Mum, we're doing this big 40th celebration thing for the company next month. Just investors, partners, media folks. I heard, I replied steady. He glanced at Bethany, then back at me. You know how these events are. Very formal, kind of exhausting. I'm not that fragile, Henry, I said with a soft edge. No, of course not. I just figured it's more your style to skip these things. But we'll send you photos, he added quickly, as if offering a bandage to a wound he didn't want to acknowledge. Lovely, I said. I smiled. I folded my napkin. I said nothing more. Because what was there to say? That the empire they were about to celebrate was born, not in a boardroom, but in the converted shed behind my old house. That the first handbag, the one that landed on the cover of that fashion magazine in '89, was designed on my kitchen table, while Graham and I passed a baby bottle back and forth. No, I would not beg for my place at the table. Not again. I left shortly after dessert. Henry walked me to the door, his eyes on his phone the whole time. Text me when you get home, okay, he said. I nodded, sure. Love you, Mom. Of course. He kissed my cheek, distracted. I don't know if he even noticed the slight tremble in my body when he touched me. Maybe if he had looked up, really looked, he would have seen that something in me had shifted. I drove home in silence, the radio off. The streets blurred past like memories I didn't ask for. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, but didn't move. I just sat there staring at the porch light, flickering gently in the wind. How easy it is to become invisible. One small decision at a time. You stop correcting people when they credit others for your work. You stop telling your stories because no one listens past the first sentence. You smile when they say, "You're just being modest," because it's simpler than explaining that modesty wasn't a choice, it was survival. I unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet warmth of my home. The air smelled faintly of lavender and lemon oil, my own small luxuries. I made tea the way I always do, strong, dark, no sugar, and then I walked into the guest room. I hadn't opened the armoire in there for years. Inside was a box wrapped in a faded blue quilt. I pulled it out, carried it to the kitchen table, and sat down. My hands hovered above it for a moment before peeling back the fabric. Inside were sketches, contracts, press clippings, Graham's leather punch tool, my original thread spools, a photograph of the first Whitmore satchel hanging in the shop window with hand-painted lettering that read, "Crafted with soul." I ran my fingers over the paper, the corners frayed from age and reverence. The smell of ink and old leather clung to the memories. They had forgotten me, but I hadn't forgotten who I was. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time in decades, I felt something stronger than bitterness or grief. I felt ready for what I wasn't entirely sure. But I knew this, I would no longer let my silence be mistaken for absence. My life, my work, my story, it still lived. I just needed to choose whether or not to bring it back into the light. The next morning, I pulled out the old wooden box in my hallway closet, the one with my stationery and ink pens. I sat at the kitchen table and began to write. Not a letter, a record of who I am, of what I built, of the woman behind the name on the building they'd all be toasting without a second thought. They might not want me at their gala, but they will remember me. By mid-morning, the light slanted through the windows just right, the kind of light that makes old paper glow like it's breathing. I sat at the kitchen table, the contents of my memory box spread before me, like a map I was finally ready to follow. Sketch after sketch. Each one bore the unmistakable signs of time creases, faded ink smudges of graphite where my fingers once pressed too hard. But the lines still held grace, muscle memory, vision, my vision. It stunned me how much of my younger self was still there, trapped in the margins and loops of letters. The way I curled the W in Whitmore so it would arch like a bridge between strength and elegance. The dotted annotations beside each bag, reinforced bottom with hidden seam, full-grain calfskin burnished edge, preferred for heritage tone. I had designed each model, not just as a product, but as an heirloom. And now those heirlooms were hanging in luxury boutiques with Bethany's name etched on gold plaques as lead designer. Funny, isn't it, how silence becomes complicity? I'd allowed the world to write over me, but not anymore. I carefully photographed each sketch, scanning the ones I wanted to preserve digitally. My laptop, a gift from Ellie. The young woman who ran the small leather shop downtown, sat open beside me. She had once told me, "If you ever want to teach again, Mrs. Whitmore, you've got an open seat in my studio." That day I hadn't responded, but now her words echoed. I found her card tucked in the side pocket of my purse and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright with energy. "Ellie Myers Designs, this is Ellie." "Ellie, dear, it's Clarisse Whitmore. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." There was a small pause, then a delighted gasp. "Mrs. Whitmore, not at all, this is a wonderful surprise. I was wondering," I said slowly, "if your offer still stood. About that seat in your studio." She didn't even hesitate. "Of course it does. Come by this afternoon. I'll make tea." Her studio was tucked in the back of a restored warehouse building on Willow Street, with windows that poured sunlight over long wooden tables, racks of scrap leather jars of buckles and waxed thread. It smelled like creation. When I walked in, Ellie was setting up a small workstation near the back. She smiled when she saw me. No pretense, no pity, just warmth. "I didn't think you'd actually take me up on it," she said, handing me a clean apron. "Neither did I admitted. But here I am." We worked side by side in easy silence. I watched her fingers, young, strong, confident, move over the leather with reverence. She reminded me of myself at her age, when every cut of the blade felt like a prayer. Eventually, she asked the question I'd expected. "Why now?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I showed her the sketchbook I'd brought. She flipped through it slowly, her eyes growing wider with each turn of the page. "These are incredible," she murmured. "They're mine," I said softly, "and they've been sitting in a box for far too long." She looked up at me, eyes brimming with something close to awe. "You designed these?" I nodded. My husband and I founded what eventually became Whitmore Prescott. But after he passed, I gave up my share. I thought I was doing the right thing. For my son, for peace. I chose to disappear. Ellie's lips parted, but no words came. I just never imagined, I continued, that one day my own son would forget I ever existed in that story. She reached out and gently touched my hand. "Let me help you bring it back. Your story, your designs. Whatever you want to do, I'm in." I felt my throat tighten. Her kindness, so freely offered, felt like balm on old wounds. "I don't know what I want yet," I said truthfully, "but I know I can't stay hidden anymore." We talked for hours. I told her stories I hadn't told in years of midnight prototyping in the garage, of how Graham and I used to test the strength of our stitching by loading bags with bricks and swinging them from the ceiling beams. She laughed, she listened, she understood. Before I left, she placed a small leather-bound notebook into my hands. "For your thoughts," she said, "or for new designs. Either way, it's time." That evening back home, I stood in the doorway of the old workshop behind my house. It hadn't been used in decades, but the structure was still sound. Dusty, yes, but the bones were good, much like me. I switched on the old overhead light. It flickered, then steadied. In the corner sat Graham's first workbench, still sturdy beneath its worn surface. I ran my hand across it and smiled. "I'm back," I whispered. The silence welcomed me. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like the woman I used to be. Not just Clarisse, the mother, or Clarisse, the widow, but Clarisse, the maker, the woman who could turn hide and thread into something timeless, the woman who could hold her own. There was still work to be done, stories to be reclaimed, truths to be told, and maybe, just maybe by the time that gala arrived, I wouldn't need an invitation. I'd write my own. I spent the next 2 days in that old workshop like a woman possessed. It was as if the walls had been waiting for me to return. The dust no longer bothered me. The spider webs in the corners didn't matter. What mattered was the smell, the rich, earthy scent of old leather mingling with cedar beams, and the way my hands remembered what my heart had almost forgotten. Each morning, I brewed a pot of black tea, tied my hair back the way I used to when Graham and I worked side by side, and picked up the awl and thread. Ellie had sent over fresh supplies, a bolt of vegetable-tanned leather beeswax, even a new set of edge tools. A small note accompanied the delivery for the real beginning. And that's what this was. A beginning, not a return. I wasn't trying to resurrect the past. I was claiming the part of myself I'd buried alive. On the third day, a large white envelope arrived in the mail. I didn't recognize the return address, but I knew the name on the invitation printed inside. Whitmore Prescott Leatherworks, 40th Anniversary Gala. There it was, in elegant gold-embossed font atop thick cardstock, with a wax seal that smelled faintly of pine. The kind of invitation that screams wealth and exclusivity. Except it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mrs. Clarisse H. Whitmore, Guest of Honor's mother. Mother, not co-founder, not original designer, not even former partner. Just mother. I read it twice, then a third time. They were extending a courtesy invite, probably out of guilt, or maybe optics. Perhaps Bethany thought it would look good to have the matriarch present in the background, nodding politely while she posed for photos under lights she didn't hang. I left the envelope on the table. Didn't respond. Didn't RSVP. But that night, I pulled down the old garment bag from the top of my closet. Inside, it hung a black evening dress I hadn't worn since Graham's last charity event. The fabric still held a whisper of him sandalwood and something citrusy from his aftershave. It was elegant, simple, devastating in its quiet power. Long sleeves, a high neckline, and a silhouette that told you the woman wearing it didn't need sequins or bare skin to command a room. I took it out, pressed it gently, and laid it across my bed. And then I sat down and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Rose, the longtime maître d' of the boutique restaurant Graham and I used to frequent before the world knew our name. She'd gone on to manage one of the finest private dining establishments in the city, the kind of place people waited months to get into. We had kept in touch loosely over the years. I knew she respected discretion, and she knew how to keep secrets. I told her I had a favor to ask, one that involved a certain upcoming gala. The second was to my lawyer, Harold Finch, a man I trusted with the messy knots of life. I didn't go into detail, just told him to prepare the original design patents contracts and a brief timeline of my role in the company's founding. I might not need them, but I wanted to have them in my hand, just in case someone decided to rewrite history to my face. The third letter was to myself. I wrote it in the little leather-bound notebook Ellie had given me. "Dear Clarisse," it began, "this is not revenge, this is reclamation." Because that's what I needed to remind myself. I wasn't doing this to shame my son, or his wife, or even that puffed-up committee of executives who now sat at the head of the table my husband built. I was doing it because I had once loved something, poured myself into it, watched it grow, and then I had been erased from it. And now, I was simply reclaiming my name. The day of the gala arrived like thunder behind glass, quiet but impossible to ignore. The city buzzed. It was on the society pages on talk radio, even on the glossy morning news segments that aired while I drank my tea. Bethany, in a crimson sheath dress, spoke to a reporter about legacy and innovation. Henry stood beside her, his smile wooden. No one mentioned me, which was fine, truly, because they had no idea what I had planned. I arrived early. I had arranged with Rose to use the service entrance, how poetic. The very way I used to enter Graham's workshops all those years ago, unnoticed, unbothered, all business. She met me in the hallway near the staff kitchen, her eyes scanning my face with something like awe. "You look majestic," she whispered. I gave a soft smile. "Let's not oversell it." "No," she said. "Let's tell the truth." She handed me a glass of water, then the night's program. I scanned it. Keynote address, Nathaniel Prescott. Introduction, Bethany Prescott. Historical tribute board of directors. Not a single mention of the name Whitmore. I tapped the bottom of the page. Room for one more. Rose grinned, always. As the guests began to arrive, celebrities, executives, fashion editors, I stood in the shadows near the hallway that led to the ballroom. I watched them file in, marveling at the crystal chandeliers and polished wood floors. Their voices were sharp with champagne and ambition. I saw Henry first. He looked nervous. Bethany was glued to his side, her lips twitching into smiles that didn't quite land. Nathaniel arrived minutes later, all handshakes and laughter slapping backs like a king among lesser nobles. They had no idea I was already inside. I didn't want a spotlight. I didn't want a stage. I just wanted a moment, and when it came, I would take it. I stood near the archway, leading into the grand ballroom, half in shadow, half in the warm spill of golden light. It was surreal watching them toast to 40 years of vision with flutes of French champagne under chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire house. The crowd was impeccable. High society at its most polished, designers, editors, investors. People I remembered from decades ago, or their children now filling the same roles, wearing the same practiced expressions of importance. I watched them move like a school of shimmering fish darting from one pocket of attention to another. Not one of them noticed me. And yet, everything they were celebrating began in the worn leather workshop behind my house. The first sketches, the first prototypes, the first sale. I remembered those late nights with Graham tracing out stitch lines while he calculated margins by hand on the back of a napkin. We didn't have staff back then. We had hands, heart, and hunger. But here they were celebrating that legacy without a whisper of its origin. Until now. Rose slipped beside me as the first course was cleared, her clipboard in hand as always. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They're beginning the historical tribute after dessert. Still want to do this." I looked toward the stage at the far end of the room. Nathaniel Prescott sat tall in his seat, smug as ever. Bethany flipped her hair and sipped from her glass, as if the world were already applauding her. "Yes," I said softly, "but not from the podium." Rose arched a brow. I held up the small linen card she had printed for me earlier that day. One simple sentence written in gold foil. "Tonight we raise a glass not just to the legacy, but to the woman who designed it." "Slip this into the final toast," I said after they thanked the board. "Just hand it to Phoebe when the servers bring out the champagne." Rose smiled like someone savoring a secret. "Consider it done." The historical video began. Black and white images flickered on a massive screen, photos of the original boutique models, holding the first signature handbags, grainy footage of Graham speaking at a ribbon cutting. I waited for my image. I knew it wouldn't come. Sure enough, they skipped right from Graham's early years to Nathaniel's strategic investment, as if my name had never existed. The applause was thunderous. Bethany took the stage next, glowing under the lights in her scarlet dress. Her voice rang out, rehearsed and poised. "We would not be here tonight without the visionaries who shaped this company's beginnings. And now it's my honor to introduce my father and the man who made Whitmore Prescott what it is today, Nathaniel Prescott." He rose to a standing ovation. I didn't move. I didn't need to. It wasn't until the champagne flutes were being passed around waiters, gliding between tables with trays of sparkling crystal, that Rose gave the smallest nod to Phoebe, the floor manager. Phoebe crossed the room smoothly and handed the card to Bethany with both hands. Bethany opened it, read it, and her face drained of color. Nathaniel leaned over, reading it upside down. He frowned. "What is this?" Bethany hesitated. Then, too proud to back down and too unsure to improvise, she cleared her throat and raised her glass. We have one more toast this evening, a surprise toast, if you will." The room quieted. This card was just handed to me by a long-time supporter of the brand, someone we've admired for years. I stepped forward, then not to the stage, but to the front of the room near table 3, where the founders of a luxury department store sat. People turned, murmured, whispered. Bethany's eyes widened in disbelief. Henry across the room looked stunned, like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm Clarisse Whitmore," I said loud enough for the first few tables to hear. "Co-founder of this company, designer of the original Whitmore collection, and proud widow of the man whose name you toasted tonight." Gasps rolled like a wave through the room. Some rose from their seats for a better view. Others remained frozen. Bethany opened her mouth, then closed it again. Nathaniel looked like someone had slapped him. I held the silence for a beat longer, then raised my glass calmly. To the legacy that began in a workshop, to the hands that stitched the first dream, and to the truth which eventually always finds its way back to the room. I drank, slowly, deliberately. Then I turned and walked toward the side exit heels, clicking against the marble floor. Not fast, not ashamed, but with the steadiness of someone who finally remembered her own worth. No one followed. Not yet. But eyes stayed on me until I disappeared behind the velvet curtain. Back in the hallway, Rose met me with a look of stunned pride. "You didn't just reclaim your name," she whispered. "You lit the whole damn room on fire." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "I didn't do it to burn anything," I said. "I just wanted the lights on." She nodded, pressing her hand to her chest. "I think the whole city heard that, Clarisse." I didn't reply. Instead, I walked out into the cool night air, my coat draped over my shoulders, like armor. The sky above was full of stars, a different kind of chandelier, one I didn't need permission to stand beneath. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not for what I could offer, or who I once belonged to, but for the woman I am. The next morning, I woke early, though I hadn't slept much. The adrenaline from the night before still coursed through my veins, like river water after a storm, fast, cold cleansing. I made tea as I always do, poured it into my favorite chipped porcelain cup, sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper open but unread. My hands were steady, but my heart was not. I wasn't scared. I'd already walked through fire, but I was bracing for what would come next. At exactly 7 to 12 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't even have to look. It was Henry. I let it ring twice, 3 times. I wanted to give myself the choice, something I hadn't had in a long time when it came to him. Finally, I answered. "Hello, Henry." Silence, then a breath. "Mom." His voice cracked like a boy's. I didn't know. I waited. There was a part of me smaller than I wanted to admit that longed for him to say more, that maybe this time he would offer something deeper than confusion or embarrassment, something real. "You didn't know what exactly," I asked gently, but without cushioning the question. "I didn't know you owned it, that you built it, that the original designs were yours, because you never asked." He exhaled heavily. "That's not fair. You never told me." I sipped my tea and looked out the window. The camellia bush was blooming unbothered by our conversation. "Fairness," I said slowly, "is when 2 people are equally interested in the truth. You, my dear, were never interested." I was busy. I had a lot going on. The business, the family. "The family," I echoed. "Yes, I suppose I was just the decorative mother. Quiet, polite, safely irrelevant. That's not what I meant, but that's how you lived," I said more firmly now. "And last night, when you toasted to a legacy you never tried to understand, you proved how comfortable you were with a version of history that excluded me." He didn't respond. Then quietly, "Bethany's furious." I chuckled without humor. "Is that supposed to move me?" "No," he muttered. "It's just, we didn't expect it." "I know, that's why it worked." Silence again. He was weighing his next words as if they were stocks, not feelings. "Can we meet?" he asked. "In person. I owe you more than this." The old part of me, the mother who had always shown up when called, always softened her edges, wanted to say yes without hesitation. But I'd changed. Not yet, I said. Give me time. Okay. His voice was quiet, deflated. But, thank you. For what you did, even if it made everything uncomfortable. Maybe that's what we needed. Maybe I said, goodbye, Henry. I ended the call and stared at the phone for a long time. I felt no regret, no gloating, just a strange emptiness as though I'd turned a corner and found a long road stretching ahead. Still foggy, but finally mine to walk. I thought back to the early years when Graham and I used to bring Henry into the shop on Saturdays. He'd sit on a stool with a sketch pad while we worked his little legs swinging as he drew strange hybrid animals, half bear, half dinosaur, on the backs of shipping invoices. He was curious once, soft, wide-eyed. Where had that boy gone? Buried, I suppose, beneath years of expectations, pressure, ego. And Bethany always whispering about image strategy networking. But still, somewhere inside that man was the boy who once asked if he could make a bag just like his mother's. Maybe he just needed a reason to remember. Later that afternoon, I returned to the workshop. The light came in high and golden, casting soft shadows on the workbench. Ellie stopped by, unexpectedly carrying a box of fresh tools. I heard what happened, she said, her voice low, reverent. Social media's going crazy. People are calling you a legend. I laughed gently. That's generous. No, it's true. There's a photo going around, someone snapped it during your toast. You look like you walked straight out of a film. I just wanted to remind them I existed, I said. Well, you did, she said, loud and clear. She hesitated. Would you ever consider doing more? A capsule collection, under your name. Not for them, for you. I looked at her. Her eyes sparkled, not with greed, not with brand ambition, but with something rarer, belief. In me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I ran my hand along a swatch of tan hide on the table. It felt like possibility. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded. Good, that's all I wanted. Before she left, she added, and Clarisse, whatever you decide, you've already done the hardest part. That night, I took out the notebook again and wrote. I didn't want applause. I wanted acknowledgement. I didn't want revenge. I wanted room to exist. The applause may fade. The headlines may quiet. But something had shifted inside me. I could feel it every time I walked into that workshop or ran my fingers over a design I once abandoned to a dusty drawer. They may not have given me a seat at the table, but I had built the damn table, and now I was ready to sit at it with or without them. 3 days passed. I didn't hear from Henry again, but I didn't expect to not so soon. He needed time to sit with his discomfort, to feel it, not brush it away. Men like him are raised to outrun shame, not sit down and drink tea with it. But Bethany doesn't wait. Bethany strategizes. The doorbell rang at precisely 10:00 a.m. on Thursday. When I opened the door, there she was standing like a magazine cover come to life. Cream-colored trench coat, silk scarf knotted just so, red lipstick without a single smudge. In her hand, a box wrapped in navy paper and tied with a gold ribbon. I didn't invite her in. She thrust the box forward. Just a small gift, she said. For what occasion, I asked. Her smile twitched. Let's say, for peace. I stepped aside and let her enter. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see her without the armor of an audience. She moved through my living room like she was inspecting a boutique. Her eyes lingered on the antique sewing machine in the corner, the old photographs on the mantel, the rack of leather swatches I'd left out from the night before. This is charming, she said. It's real, I replied. Sit down, Bethany. She did, crossed her legs, perched delicately at the edge of my floral armchair, like she might catch dust on her soul if she leaned back too far. I want to apologize, she said, voice smooth and rehearsed, for the oversight, for the way we made you feel. You didn't make me feel anything I said evenly. You made choices. I had feelings in response to those choices. There's a difference. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that. I understand, she said, that we didn't include you in the celebration the way we should have. You didn't include me at all. She paused, smiled tightly. We thought you'd prefer to stay in the background. Henry always said you weren't involved. I leaned forward slightly. I wasn't just involved, Bethany. I was the origin. You've been walking through doors I carved open with my own hands. She swallowed hard. I didn't know. You didn't want to. Silence fell between us, heavy and brittle. After a long moment, she tried again. The truth is, I admire what you did, what you've built. That toast, it was powerful. Thank you. I think the brand could benefit from more of that story, she added, and just like that, I saw it. The shift, the real reason for her visit. This wasn't remorse. It was damage control. She wasn't here to make amends. She was here to absorb my narrative before it became uncontrollable. To spin it, frame it, monetize it. I smiled. You want me to be part of the brand now? She looked mildly relieved. I think it could be mutually beneficial. You'd be honored properly. Legacy campaigns, interviews. We could even name a new line after you. I studied her like I would a flawed piece of hide, shiny on the surface but too thin to hold. Bethany, I said softly, do you know the difference between heritage and branding? She blinked. What? Branding is what people want you to believe. Heritage is what actually happened. One fades, the other stays in the bones. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I rose and picked up the navy box from the side table, untied the ribbon, lifted the lid. Inside was a silk scarf from one of the luxury designers she always name-dropped. Hand-painted, limited edition, worth more than most people's rent. I held it up by the corner, letting the light catch the intricate swirls. Beautiful, I said, but it doesn't buy what you think it does. I'm not trying to buy anything. You're always trying to buy something, I said, folding the scarf and placing it gently back in the box. Approval, silence, loyalty, the past. Her jaw tightened. I just thought we could build something together. We did, I said, walking to the door and opening it. You just didn't know it. She stood, smoothed her coat, picked up the box like it weighed more than it did. I'll tell Henry you're not interested. Do. She hesitated at the threshold. You really won't even consider it. I already have my own plans, I said. Ones that don't require your approval. Bethany stepped out into the sunlight, blinking. As I began to close the door, she turned back. You know, she said, voice low, the world doesn't always reward quiet integrity. I smiled. No, I said, but sometimes it remembers it, loudly. I closed the door, gently, decisively. That afternoon, I sat at my workbench and began sketching again. Not for them, for me. A new line, something cleaner, stronger, built on the bones of everything they tried to forget. Ellie was right, this could be the beginning of something, but not for their brand, for mine, for the story I would tell on my terms in my own time. 3 days passed in a kind of quiet resolve. I worked in my workshop each morning, letting my hands lead where my thoughts couldn't yet follow. The sketches were different now, still rooted in the legacy I once built, but stripped of pretense. They weren't chasing trends. They weren't trying to fit in. They were mine, and they were angry, and elegant, and whole. Ellie came by once a day with updates on suppliers' leather options, and her usual wide-eyed enthusiasm that reminded me so much of who I used to be when I was still invisible but hopeful. We started talking about a name for the new line, something small, local and proud, something that didn't ask for permission to exist. We hadn't settled on it yet, but the seed was planted. Then on the 4th morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not an email, not a text message, a real letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, precise, architectural, Henry's. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, letting the steam rise before me like a curtain. I stared at the envelope for longer than I cared to admit, as if it might vanish if I blinked. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe another apology filled with the same polite regret. Maybe a subtle attempt to smooth things over. Maybe nothing at all. But when I finally opened it, I found something I never thought I'd receive from my son. A story. Dear Mom, when I was 11, you let me stay up late on the night you launched the first storefront. I remember you pacing in the kitchen, rehearsing numbers with Dad, both of you exhausted and electric. You thought I was asleep, but I watched from the stairs. I saw you cry when the last piece of the shelving didn't arrive. I saw Dad hold your hand and whisper, "It's still going to work." You were strong, but you were tired. I think I started forgetting who you were that night, not because of anything you did, but because I watched you trade your light for structure. You disappeared into keeping everything together. You gave up visibility for function. and I let you. I've spent most of my life thinking you were just background. Bethany always said you were quaint, polite, simple. But she didn't know you and I didn't correct her. I didn't know how to, because I had let myself forget. But when you stood up at that gala and said your name with such unapologetic grace, I saw something crack open inside me. You weren't just reclaiming your story. You were reminding me that I have one too, and I haven't written it very well. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like a chance to earn it. If you'll let me. Love, Henry. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't cry, not because it didn't move me, but because some emotions don't fall from the eyes. They press into your ribs and make you sit a little longer in the stillness. This was not just a letter. It was an offering, not of repair, but of intention. There is a difference, and I know it now. That afternoon, I drove across town to Ellie's studio. We were scheduled to meet with a photographer for the capsule preview shoot. The pieces were coming together, 5 bags, all handcrafted, all signed with a discreet CW embossed inside the lining. When I walked in, she looked up from her work table and beamed. "You look lighter today," she said. "I received something unexpected," I replied. "A letter. From Henry." I nodded. Her smile softened. "Good letter. I think so. I think it came from the version of him I used to know. Before the money. Before the name. We worked together until sunset, arranging the bags in natural light, testing different leathers against muted linen backdrops. She handled the marketing side. I curated the story carefully, truthfully, without embellishment. By evening, the photos were ready to send to press. It wasn't a product line, it was a declaration. That night, I lit a candle in the living room and sat with my tea. I didn't call Henry. Not yet. Some bridges take time to cross. But I placed his letter in the drawer beside my bed, next to the photo of Graham, and the deed to the workshop, and the first sketch I ever drew of the Whitmore original. Because no matter what happens next, that letter told me one thing. He saw me, finally, maybe only for a moment. But it was real, and now I had choices, real ones. Not about how they saw me, but about how I would choose to move forward with or without them. And that perhaps is the deepest kind of freedom. The knock came late Sunday morning. Not urgent, not tentative, just there. I had been in the back garden trimming the lavender before the heat set in when I heard it. At first, I thought it might be Ellie dropping off fabric samples or Rose with gossip from the restaurant crowd. But when I opened the door, it was Henry. No car idling in the driveway. No Bethany. Just my son standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets and an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy trying to explain a broken window. "Hi, Mom." His voice was rough from disuse or emotion, I couldn't tell which. I looked at him closely. He wasn't polished, not like usual. No tailored suit, no Rolex watch. Just dark jeans, a navy shirt rolled at the sleeves, and exhaustion in the creases around his eyes. "Hello, Henry," I said, stepping aside. "Are you here to talk or just to stand there looking miserable?" He blinked, surprised, then a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I'm here to talk," he said, "if you'll let me." I led him into the living room. He sat on the edge of the couch again, just like Bethany had. But he wasn't posturing. He looked down at his hands, fidgeted, waited. I poured him tea and sat across from him, my back straight, my hand steady. He looked up. "I'm sorry. You already said that in your letter." "I know, but I wanted to say it to your face, because it matters more that way." I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I let the silence stretch just enough for him to fill it honestly. "I didn't know what you built," he continued. "I didn't know who you were outside of being my mother." "That's because you never asked." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think I needed to. I thought I already knew you." I tilted my head, and now, he looked around the room, taking in the leather tools, the fabric swatches, the books of design theory stacked neatly on the shelves. His gaze lingered on a framed photograph of Graham and me, standing in front of the original storefront arms, around each other, proud and sweaty and whole. Now I realize I knew almost nothing. I sipped my tea. He stared into his cup, then said, "Bethany, she's angry." "That doesn't surprise me. She thinks you embarrassed us on purpose." I smiled faintly. "If I'd wanted to embarrass you, Henry, I would have done far worse than raise a glass to the truth." He exhaled, more wounded than angry. "I don't want to defend her. She's complicated, ambitious, controlling. And you I let her steer things, because it was easier than fighting, because she had the plan and I didn't. I studied him. Do you remember what Dad used to say about letting someone else drive? He smiled faintly. Eventually, you forget where you were going. We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to fix this. I set my cup down. Henry, I'm not interested in fixing what's broken if the only reason is guilt or exposure. It's not just that. It's partly that. He didn't deny it. But it's also realizing how much I've lost. Not just your presence, your wisdom, but your story, your strength. I grew up thinking I was the son of a man who built something important. But I was also the son of the woman who designed it, shaped it, breathed it to life. My throat tightened. I hadn't expected those words, not from him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I want to be part of your life, not to reclaim something, but to learn, if you'll let me. I sat back, folded my hands in my lap. That's not a question to answer in a single conversation, Henry. Trust once broken doesn't mend overnight. You cut me out of your life for years, and now you've seen a sliver of who I am, and it moved you. That's good. But it's not enough. I know, he whispered. I'm not asking you to forgive me today. Good, I said, because I'm not ready. He nodded. But I added, I'm willing to talk, slowly, in honesty, without your wife, your board, or your branding strategies. He gave a small, hopeful smile. I can do that. And you're not to ask me for business advice, a percentage, or a platform. This is not your rebranding opportunity. Understood. If we talk, I said slowly, we talk as people. Not as legacy, not as heirs, just mother and son. He looked up at me. I'd like that, he said. I studied him, then said, come by next Sunday, 11 o'clock. Bring nothing but the truth. He nodded, blinking hard. Thank you. I walked him to the door. And when he stepped out into the sunlight, he paused. Mom, yes, I'm proud of you. I held his gaze. Let's work on being proud of yourself first. He smiled, a real one this time, and walked to his car. I watched him drive away, the dust settling in the wake of something that might be healing. The house was quiet after Henry left. Not a heavy silence like before, but a reflective one. As if the walls were listening, considering what had just happened, deciding whether to exhale. I didn't rush to call anyone. I didn't go online or pull out a journal. I just made another cup of tea, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the breeze move through the lavender I'd trimmed that morning. Healing doesn't arrive like lightning. It drips in, slowly testing the edges of you. Henry had come to me not with entitlement but humility. That mattered, but it didn't erase the years, or the choices, or the loneliness. What it did give me was space, and space is the first ingredient of anything worth building. By Thursday, Ellie had finalized the sample photos for our capsule line. 5 bags each, inspired by an element of my life that had once been overlooked. One was shaped after the first pattern Graham and I ever sold. One borrowed its stitched detailing from the leather-bound notebook my father gave me when I was 16. Another, my favorite, was called the Sunday Silence. A simple, elegant shoulder bag with no logo, just clean curves, hidden strength, and a closure that clicked with finality. We didn't name the line. I didn't want to. Let them come to it with no pretext, no expectation. Let the work speak. Let the hand show what the mouth had been silenced from saying for too long. When Ellie asked if I wanted to do interviews, I said no. When a journalist from a major fashion magazine reached out to profile the reclusive design icon, I declined politely. I wasn't interested in becoming a story for others to write. I was interested in being a woman who had stopped hiding. One afternoon, while reorganizing the back of my workshop, I found a crate I hadn't opened in years. Inside were notebooks, pages and pages of ideas that never made it to production. Some designs were raw, some ambitious, some heartbreakingly beautiful in their imperfection. I found one marked C.W. Paris, 1987. I laughed. That trip, Graham had surprised me with it after our 5th year in business. We couldn't afford to stay at any of the fancy hotels, so we found a quiet little pensione near the Latin Quarter. I remember sketching in cafes while he read the paper, our son back home with my sister, both of us, high on ambition and jet lag. That bag had been inspired by the wrought iron balcony railings, twists and turns, rigid strength hidden inside elegant spirals. I'd never made it. Now I would. I laid the sketch flat on the work table and traced it again. This time, not for the market, not for the press, not for profit. For me. That weekend, Ellie and I invited a handful of local artisans and craft students to the studio for a quiet launch preview. No press, no social media, just hands and eyes and stories. We called it a showing, not a sale. The response was soft but deep. One older woman, Ruth, ran her hand across a tan leather satchel and whispered, "I haven't felt quality like this in 20 years." Her voice cracked when she said it, like she was remembering some version of herself that had also been folded into a drawer. A younger man named Devin asked if I'd ever considered teaching. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. Afterward, Ellie and I sat in the studio, surrounded by empty teacups, wine-stained napkins, and open notebooks. She looked at me. "You know, this is only the beginning, right?" "I'm 72, Ellie." She smiled. "So you're just getting interesting." I laughed, and it felt good to laugh without it catching on grief. The next day I received a delivery. No note, just a long rectangular box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside a framed photograph of the Whitmore Prescott original storefront. But this one had been edited. Graham and I were both in it arms linked. But in the corner, someone had added a simple gold foil caption. The forgotten founder never really disappeared. There was no card, but I knew who had sent it, and I didn't call to say thank you, because some things are better acknowledged in silence, through action, through time. I hung the frame in my workshop right above the main table. Now when I design, it looks down on me, not as a reminder of what was taken, but of what was always mine. That evening, I wrote a short paragraph on the inside flap of a new sketchbook. I'm no longer trying to be remembered. I'm trying to live without apology. And that is legacy enough. The truth is, I don't know what comes next. I don't know if Henry and I will ever be close again. I don't know if Bethany will soften or calcify further. I don't know if this new capsule line will sell, or if it even needs to. But I know this. I'm building again. And this time, I don't need a name above a door, or approval from a board, or champagne toasts from strangers. All I need is my hands, my stories, and a workshop that smells like the past I've finally reclaimed. Henry returned the next Sunday, right on time. 11 o'clock sharp. No Bethany this time. No gift box. No polished apology rehearsed in a luxury sedan on the drive over. Just him, standing at the door in jeans and a worn button-down, holding a paper bag, with something that smelled suspiciously like cinnamon and butter. "I brought scones," he said, "from that bakery on Willow, the one you used to take me to after school." I stepped aside. They oversweeten them now. He gave a small smile. I figured, but I thought the gesture might still count. We sat at the kitchen table. He watched me make tea with quiet familiarity, not intruding, not performing. When I sat down, he didn't reach for the scones or launch into a monologue. He just said, "How are you?" I blinked. No one had asked me that in months. Not in that tone, not for real. I answered slowly, deliberately, "Better." "Good," he said. "I'm glad." And then we sat, in a silence that didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. Like we'd each taken a long, separate walk through the forest, and now we were sitting together at the clearing. Not rushing to explain the route, just appreciating the view. After a few minutes, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "This," he said, sliding it across the table, "is my resignation letter." I stared at it. "What do you mean?" I stepped down from the board, he said, voice even, from Whitmore Prescott entirely. I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I didn't build it," he said. "And I don't believe in what it's become. It's not a company anymore. It's a brand machine. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life managing a lie." I looked at the letter but didn't touch it. "And Bethany?" "She's furious," he said quietly, "but she'll manage." He leaned back suddenly, looking older than his years. "I've been living in a world of glass. Everything looks perfect, but it's all so fragile. One wrong word, one mistake, and it all cracks. I don't want that anymore." I studied him, not with suspicion but with care. This wasn't the man who'd once asked me to change my outfit for a party so I wouldn't embarrass him. This was someone shedding his skin. "I don't know what I'm going to do next," he added, "but I want to do something that feels honest." I gave a small nod. He glanced toward the doorway toward the back of the house. "Can I see the workshop?" I paused, then nodded again. We walked together quietly to the back door across the garden path and into the heart of my world. He stepped inside, looked around, and his breath caught. "I remember this," he whispered. "It's smaller than I remember, but it feels the same." He moved slowly through the room, his fingers grazing the edge of the table, the spools of wax thread, the cutting mat. He stopped at the wall where the photograph now hung, the one with Graham and me, in front of the original storefront. His voice was hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I came up beside him. "Because for a long time I didn't think you wanted to know." He nodded, eyes still on the photo. "I didn't. That was the worst part. You were right in front of me and I just refused to see." I placed my hand on the table, fingers splayed wide. "Henry," I said softly, "I don't need you to carry guilt. I need you to carry understanding. That's the heavier burden. But it's also the more useful one." He turned to me. "Then let me help. With this. With what you're building now." I met his eyes. "Help how?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I'm not asking for ownership. Or a name. I just want to be around it. To learn. To be useful. Even if that means sweeping floors and fetching supplies." I smiled gently. "It's not glamorous." "I'm not looking for glamorous," he said. "I've had plenty of that. I want something real." We stood there in the sun-dusted silence of the workshop, the air thick with cedar and thyme. And for the first time in years, I saw my son not as a man tangled in ambition, but as a boy who once sat in this very room with a sketch pad and 1,000 questions. Later, we returned to the kitchen. He helped me wash the cups. I let him. Before he left, I walked him to the porch. He turned to me, hesitant. "Can I come back next week?" I nodded. "Same time." He smiled. Then, as he stepped down onto the path, he paused, looked back. "I never deserved the things you gave up for me." I shook my head. It was never about deserving. It was about love. But love, Henry, needs to evolve. Or it calcifies. He nodded once, then let me try. I watched him walk away, not knowing what would come next. But I didn't need to, because what he hadn't said, that was what mattered most. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for presence. And that finally was a place we could begin. The day the first order came in, I was in the middle of hand-stitching a bag we had nicknamed the Quiet One. It was smooth minimalist, all hidden stitching and silent strength. No flashy buckles, no screaming logos. Just form and function, and years of patience distilled into something that could sit silently on someone's shoulder and say everything. Ellie burst into the workshop holding her phone like it was glowing. "Clarisse," she said breathlessly, "we sold out." I looked up from the workbench, needle still between my fingers. "Sold out," I repeated, not quite believing. "Every single piece, all 5 designs, 48 hours. She handed me the phone, her face flushed with joy. I stared at the screen order confirmations, shipping requests, names I didn't recognize, but who somehow recognized me. "You said you didn't need press," Ellie whispered, "but you've started a movement. People are talking. About dignity, craft, about stories that matter again." I handed the phone back and quietly returned to my stitching. "Let them talk," I said. "We'll keep making." That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine watching the sky shift from gold to bruised lavender. The garden smelled like rosemary and rain. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing a Miles Davis record on their porch. The air hummed. I was tired, but not in the way I used to be. This was the kind of tired that feels earned, the kind that lives in your bones but doesn't steal from your soul. The kind that says, you did something that mattered today. The next morning, Henry showed up again, earlier than usual. He knocked once, then let himself in the back way like he used to when he was a boy, coming home after baseball practice. He smelled faintly of cedar and sawdust. "I fixed the garden gate," he said simply. "It kept dragging in the mud." I smiled. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He followed me into the workshop, hung up his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, took his place at the small second workbench we'd cleared just for him. For the next 3 hours we worked in silence. He sanded edges and oiled leather. I stitched and adjusted templates. Sometimes we spoke about a tool, a technique, a memory. Sometimes we didn't. But there was something whole in that silence, something restored. By noon, Ellie arrived with the news that a small boutique in Boston had reached out. They wanted to carry our line in-store under my terms under our name. "What do you want me to tell them?" she asked. I looked over at Henry, who was threading a needle with a quiet determination I recognized as my own. "Tell them we'll think about it," I said. "We're not in a hurry." Because we weren't. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like time was running out. I felt like it was expanding. That night I did something I hadn't done in over 30 years. I wrote in my old design ledger. I used the same pen Graham once gave me, a fountain pen that still worked after all these years. I wrote not about sales or trends or projections, but about what mattered. This isn't a comeback. This is a continuation. Not because the world allowed it, but because I no longer needed its permission. The following weekend, I received a card in the mail. Cream-colored, thick stock, from Bethany. Inside, only 2 lines handwritten in small, elegant script. "You won, but more importantly, you were right." I placed the card in the drawer with Henry's letter, not because I needed her words, but because it was proof that even those who once tried to bury you will one day be forced to acknowledge the roots they never saw. The workshop is quiet again tonight, but not lonely. Henry is locking up the back gate. Ellie is in the corner organizing the spring samples. And me, I'm standing at the main table, holding the last piece of a new bag we've been working on for weeks. The last stitch is always my favorite. It's the one that seals, the shape completes the journey, makes it whole. I thread the needle, push it through, and tie it off with care. Not every story needs to end with a clean resolution. Some just need a closing breath, a moment to say, "I came back, I spoke, I created, I reclaimed what was mine." And I handed it down, not in anger, not in silence, but in strength. Let the rest be legacy.